What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Friday, February 15th, 2019. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. We have got a lot to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, ready to answer the phone, put you on the air with your comments, questions, and observations. And of course, this being Friday, the lovely Lady Claire will be joining us in hour number 3 with her unique perspective on the world. So let's get right on into it. Obviously, the top news right now, just now breaking, in Aurora, Illinois, there is another one of these mass shootings that seem to conveniently pop up every once in a while when the gun grabber agenda is running into resistance. Because, again, have you noticed how many states passed constitutional carry laws recently? And the gun grabbers, we have to stop that. Remember Columbine? That happened right after that state had passed a law, loosening gun restrictions here. And we are already hearing ATF and FBI are already on the scene, which, yeah, this is feds all over it here. And, of course, just in time to distract the corporate media from reporting on Donald Trump's national emergency declaration and the issues with the border. So apparently the shooting is at the Henry Pratt Company. And so far, I mean, it's live coverage and they're blasting it all over, but not a lot of actual hard information. 4 police officers injured, unknown number of civilians, one witness statement saying whoever it is shooting at everybody. It's almost starting to feel like a repeat of the Mandalay Bay shooting. So anyway, we'll see what happens. And, of course, I don't like to see anybody get hurt in any one of these false flag situations, but we'll see what develops. And if they actually find this shooter or not, or if they'll find an abandoned AR-15 tricked out with all the banned accessories or something. All right, so let's get into the real news for today, and that is, of course, that Trump has declared a national emergency over the border crisis. And he did something which I think was very clever, and that was he shifted the issue away from illegal immigration to drugs, human traffickers, and gang activity. And that was really a good thing for him to do, because the Democrats always fight back on illegal immigration. Oh, we love the immigrants, bring the immigrants in, they're going to vote for us, and you're being racist if you refuse to let illegal immigrants walk over the border. But Democrats really can't come back and say, oh yeah, we're in favor of drugs flooding into this country, we're in favor of human trafficking, and we're in favor of gang activity. So Trump was very clever on that. He got some good advice from somebody, or maybe he thought it up himself, but it was a smart thing to do here. Now, the U.S. House and Senate have approved the spending and border security bill to avert the government shutdown, and it's going to go to Trump for his signature. Now, this bill provides just $1.3 billion for fencing, which is not what Trump wanted, and Trump is expected to sign it. However, there are apparently provisions built into the spending bill that Trump apparently is not aware of, because there are provisions in there that allow state and local governments to refuse to have the wall built along their portions of the border with Mexico. In other words, trapdoors for the wall are already part of the legislation. And there's some other stuff in there that really isn't very pleasant for the American people. In fact, most of it isn't for the American people. There's money for Israel, and there's money for the war machine, and so forth. But Donald Trump came on out and basically said he's going to be using a combination of unallocated funds from the Pentagon and some revenues generated by trade deals, and he is going to actually set a target of $8 billion for the wall. And so it looks like it's moving forward. But again, back in, I think it was 1997, there was a bill passed by both houses of Congress to build 700 miles of border fence, of which only 33 miles were built. And nobody seems to know why the project was stopped and where that money went. Now, over at traditionalright.com, they had this great article, What the President Should Have Said. And instead of Trump's rather tepid speech here. This says, let us imagine I'd received a telegram from the White House requesting me to draft remarks for the president. Here's what I would have had him say. Once again, the left-wingers who run the Democratic Party have refused to defend America and its citizens from invasion. They demand that we leave our southern border open to anyone who wants to cross. Millions of people have come here illegally across the border, and the Democrats want millions more to do so. The American people need to understand why the Democrats want open borders. It is not because they want to be nice to little children. The Democrats have a strategy for taking and keeping power in this country, and that strategy is to flood the country with immigrants who they will register to vote, whether they are legal or illegal immigrants. They expect those immigrants to vote Democratic so they can swamp the votes of native-born Americans in a sea of immigrant votes. They plan to make every America a stranger in his own country. They want to make foreigners the real rulers through a corrupted ballot box. And yeah, that really is exactly what's going on. We're going to do a shout out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. And already the fight is on. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is already getting ready to introduce a bill to block Trump's emergency declaration. Now, this is setting us up ultimately for a constitutional crisis. Who's really in charge here? I mean, the president does have authority to declare national emergencies. That has been codified in executive orders going all the way back to Richard Nixon. And remember, the way that works, these executive orders, they're entered in the Federal Registry. Congress has 30 days to reject them. But after that, they become the law. So apparently, Alexandria is going to try and get Congress to overturn the emergency declaration, and Trump will be left with absolutely nothing. He should have held off signing that bill until he had the money locked in there. I mean, Pelosi was on TV earlier today screaming about how dare the president run around Congress. We have the power of the purse, and we will decide what the nation is going to be doing. And that's funny because I thought we, the American people, ultimately were supposed to choose the course of our nation, but I guess I'm being rather dangerously naive here. Over in California, Governor Gavin Newsom is out there saying to Trump, we'll see you in court. So the Democrats really, they're on the warpath. They want that border open. They want millions and millions of illegal immigrants coming in with their diseases and their drugs. And, you know, as long as they vote Democratic, it doesn't matter if the crime rate goes up or if the streets are filled with feces and litter. None of that really matters as long as they get those Democratic votes. It's disgusting. It's absolutely disgusting. Okay, tomorrow night, former FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe is going to be on the 60 Minutes TV show in which he admits something that is in his book, that he literally initiated an effort to try and get President Trump from office to basically overturn the results of the election, citing his concerns with the president's supposed ties to Russia, for which no evidence has ever surfaced. Okay? And he just calmly sits there and says that he attempted to gather enough people, enough support inside the administration to invoke the 25th Amendment to remove the president from office. Well, this is a coup d'etat. Andrew McCabe plotted a coup d'etat to overturn the results of the election and defy the will of the American people. That's not the way the United States is supposed to work. And I'd like to see a little more outrage. Of course, I know from the Democrat side, yeah, well, you know, we're only angry that it didn't succeed. But Trump's supporters should be out in the streets, you know, with hanging McCabe in effigy. You know, this is pitchforks and flaming torches time when you find out this kind of stuff is going on inside the government. So, I mean, really, you should be angry. I'm angry. I'm disappointed in Trump, but I'm very angry at the way McCabe tried to basically pervert the process of democracy in this country. Okay, over in the Congress, as you know, last week, Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez embarrassed herself. That's the only word for it. And the Democratic Party, when she brought out her Green New Deal legislation, and it's one of the most absurd bills to ever be announced in Washington. And the details sparked immediate mockery, which led to Ocasio-Cortez and her people yanking an elaborate fact section off the internet and declaring it a distortion of the bill's reality. Really, it doesn't really say that inside. Yeah, it does. It says a lot of crazy things here. But I mean, this is a bill that aims to, among other things, eliminate every car, boat, and plane in America within 10 years. That is simply not practical. I mean, what are you going to use in place of boats, for example? And what are you going to use in place of aircraft? For example, if people from California want to come here to Hawaii. Well, it turns out there actually is a proposal in the bill to build a railway bridge from the United States to here in Hawaii. It's only about, 2,000, 3,000 miles here. And at some places, the ocean is 5 miles deep. So Mitch McConnell is going to force a vote on this to get the Senate on the record, whether they support this or not. And McConnell is smelling blood in the water, because if these Democrats vote for it, that will work against them in 2020 or the next time they're up for election. And if they vote it down, it's a disaster for the Democrats' rising star, Ocasio-Cortez. So now she's out there trying to play the victim card, feels sorry for me, and she's making a big deal about this naked picture hoax, and she's slamming conservative media for publishing a fake naked image of her in a stinging rebuke of Republican efforts to smear her. And she also took a shot at the Daily Mail. Well, this image has been doing the rounds on Reddit for over a month. It's already been completely discredited. It's not like anybody really wants to see her naked anyway. But this isn't the way Republicans operate. It's the way Democrats operate. And I think the Democrats are also thinking she's going to be a one-term congresswoman. But I think Alexandria is playing the poor victim card. Feel sorry for me. Backing that up is this article out of the Gateway Pundit, in which somebody was watching Ocasio-Cortez's Twitter channel and saw her likes go from 1,500 to 17,000 in just 10 seconds. So you think about that. All right, we're going to grab some phone calls here. We've got Steve Elkins. Aloha, Steve. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, you had a caller yesterday. I was very interested in what he had to say. He kind of painted a kind of a doom and gloom picture that, and he pointed out some things that were very, very important. The timing of everything. And Donald Trump having the majority in the House and the Senate, not doing anything then about the border walls, but waiting until it changed, it shifted the other way, and then now wants to do something about it. I'm concerned about that also. It's almost as if he's trying to appear, he's posing as if he cares, or maybe he's just working with the globalists all along. I kind of wonder. But that's an interesting point to point out. Why not act when you have the majority and he waited so long? Second thing is, with the money that was taken from El Chapo under civil forfeiture, if that's $17 billion, that's a true, accurate number. Why not just take that? You mentioned it yesterday. Take that and use that for your border wall. What's preventing Donald Trump from using that money? I have no idea what happens to civil forfeiture money that they take from us, but this is a large sum of money.
It is a large sum of money. Normally, civil forfeiture funds are divided up among the various agencies involved in the law enforcement activity. In this case, this would be, I guess, FBI, DEA, various police agencies. But Ted Cruz has introduced a repeat of the bill that he introduced in 2017, saying, "Yeah, let's take this money and apply it to the border wall." Now, I don't know when it's going to be brought to the floor for a vote. I'd like to see it happen real soon. But again, we're seeing this incredible factionalization between the open borders people and the real Americans who want our country to stay America. Just like we're seeing over in Europe, where the Europeans are now seeing Europe melt away in favor of this multicultural goulash that's being poured all over them.
Yeah, well, how would the Democrats respond and negatively saying, you can't do that? I mean, he's not getting the money from the Congress. He gets it from the civil forfeiture. The wall gets built. Well, what excuses can they use to say, no, you can't use that money? I mean, this is kind of crazy. This is a great opportunity for him because right now he's going to be tied up in the courts now. And it'll probably be pushed over
here's
to
the
Supreme
problem.
Court.
Ted Cruz's bill probably is not going to get through the House of Representatives because it is now a Democratic majority. And they'll just say, well, we just felt the money should really go to other things like, providing abortions, providing birth control to high school kids, and, funding gender transition surgery and things like that.
That's it for me, Mike. Appreciate it. Have a great show.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go, and getting an update from the mass shooting over in Aurora, Illinois. They're now making a big deal out of witnesses saying that they saw green laser beams. So looks like the agenda for this staged shooting is to outlaw laser sights. So that's going to go on the list of, oh, you're a terrorist or you're a mass shooter if you have a laser sight. No, maybe I just want to make sure I'm hitting that burglar who's breaking into my home. All right, back to the phones. Don in the Philippines, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike. I don't think Trump should pass he should not sign this bill. But it looks like he's going to sign it. He's turned into a guy that's just conciliatory.
He's clearly not read it. He's clearly not read it. The Democrats have engineered all kinds of trapdoors into his border security wall.
Yeah, well, nobody's read it. Nobody's read it. It's 1,100 pages. Nobody's read every word of it. And they're going to find out more things, more different sentences that they included in there that's going to... one thing, like you mentioned, that if any border town that lacks the cartels, which is a lot of those border towns, right? They're run by the cartels are in cahoots with the politicians. They can say, well, no wall here. Well, it's going to take these Mexican immigrants about 5 minutes to get the word to get around. Well, this is a city we can go through, and they're going to go through there, and you can build a wall all the way across the Arizona border. But if Nogales, Arizona, says we don't want the wall here, then they're just going to flood through Nogales. I mean, if that's so that this bill is no good, and Trump in general, he's just turned into the complete opposite of what I thought I was voting for. I thought I was voting for a guy who had nothing to lose. I thought he would just do what was right because he had nothing to lose. Instead, he's just he's turned into, I hate to use the bad word on your in deference to your on-air affiliates, but he's a vagina. So I'll let you go, Mike. Thanks.
I think he's lazy. We've been hearing these stories about how he only works half days. There was another report that came out a week ago that was very troubling in that he doesn't actually read reports. He just relies on his staff to summarize, which allow the staff to spin things any way that they want. But I mean, apparently the bill allows Mexican cartel-connected Texas counties to stop the border wall. And we know there's been a lot of problems with drug money corruption in Texas. The bill gives protection to illegal aliens who sponsor unaccompanied minors. Local leftist politicians will have the power to veto the wall construction. And the bill does not provide funding for needed hires at Immigration Customs Enforcement. So it's a real bad deal. And, Trump, to do his job, he's got to do his homework. And clearly he is not. And he's out there playing politics. Anyway, listen, Don, we've got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the phone call, and we will be right back. America, welcome back to our show here. And the corporate media, they are just totally focused on this shooting incident in Aurora. It's not news reporting. They're selling it. they're selling it. Ooh, it's horror, 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 horror. They're making a big deal over the fact that a laser sight was in use. And, the timing is suspect. It's one day after the 1 year anniversary of Parkland, which a lot of people suspect was another staged incident. And, of course, it gives the corporate media an excuse not to report on anything else. And there's a lot that they should be reporting on, like the fact that the Warsaw Mideast Security Summit turned into an absolute debacle. We'll be talking about that a little bit later in the show here. Meanwhile, Tulsi Gabbard has introduced a bill to Congress that would prevent Trump from pulling out of the INF treaty. And I applaud her for doing this, but I'm not sure that Congress has that authority under the Constitution, because this is crossing over into foreign policy. And that's in the executive branch. Tulsi, I love you, and I admire it, and it's a great symbolism. I'm not sure it's going to get very far here. But Tulsi is attracting a lot of attention, and that's making a lot of people very, very nervous because she appears to be a genuine peace candidate. For one thing, she's the only Democrat running for 2020 who's actually been in a war zone. She was an officer in the Hawaiian National Guard on a combat deployment in Iraq. She served as a medic, but even though she's still in Congress, she still performs her guard duty. And she seems to be honestly anti-war. And probably that's because of her war duty. She's seen it up close. She's seen what it looks like, something that the other contenders for 2020 have not. If you go back and you look at the history of American presidents, you'll find those who actually were in wars became our most anti-war presidents. And Eisenhower being the supreme example of that. He was the supreme Allied commander of Europe in World War II. But as president, he was anti-war, spoke out against military spending. There was the famous Cross of Iron speech. There was his warning and his farewell address about the military-industrial complex. But one good thing that Tulsi is doing is she's driving the warmongering corporate media absolutely crazy. And she was on Morning Joe a while back, and Morning Joe, they're very pro-war. They're absolutely in lockstep. They don't have anybody working on the show who's not fully on board. So they were interviewing Tulsi, and panelist Casey Hunt came on out and said, "Do you think Assad is our enemy?" And this was in reference to Gabbard's meeting with Syria's president back in 2017. And Gabbard replied, "Assad is not the enemy of the United States because Syria does not pose a direct threat to the United States." And no, they do not. But here is the problem. In so doing, Morning Joe just reminded everybody that our kids are over there in Syria not to fight ISIS, but to regime change yet another country. And I'm sure probably those kids over there in Syria are being told, "Oh, you're here to fight the terrorists, you're here to fight ISIS." But Morning Joe just kind of They broke their own propaganda that way. And there's one thing for propaganda to work. It's got to be self-consistent. It's got to present a believable alternative reality to be imposed over the real reality. And when it gets this reckless and self-contradictory, it does begin to fall apart. And I think that's why Americans' trust in the corporate media is at all-time record lows, which is why the corporate media is wishing those of us in the independent media would just go away, which we're not going to do. Okay, Ilhan Omar is basically taking on the establishment. And, of course, she's being attacked and smeared as an anti-Semite. Because talking about AIPAC, and of course nobody in Congress wants to talk about AIPAC. The other day they were saying, well, yeah, we get some money from them, but we do all these wonderful things for Israel because we sincerely believe it's the right thing to do. Well, during the recent congressional hearing, she went after Elliott Abrams to account for his role in war crimes, the backing of death squads and genocides in Central America back in the 1980s. And he got very upset about it. And the new spin now is that Omar doesn't really care about death squads and genocide. She only went after Elliot Abrams because he's Jewish and she's a known anti-Semite. And therefore we can dismiss everything that she said about Abrams' past crimes in South America. It's irrelevant. This is just another example of Jew hate on display. Getting really pathetic out there. Okay, we're going to take another break for commercials and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show and an update from Aurora, Illinois. It looks like it may have been the real deal after all. The alleged shooter has been apprehended. So far, it doesn't look like anybody was killed, but people were injured. They're in the hospital with what are described as non-life-threatening injuries. And for all you AR-15 fans out there, the guy was using a pistol, and he has been identified as a co-worker in that Henry Platt plant. So it's a disgruntled worker situation. And of course, my next question is then, was he on prescription antidepressants? That's going to be my next question here. All righty. So getting on back to Omar, Ilhan Omar, and she kicked up a real fuss when she made a comment about AIPAC. Oh, you can't talk about AIPAC. You can't do that. But the reality is AIPAC, and for that matter, the Adelsons, they're just the very tiny tip of a very large iceberg. If you want to talk about the Israel lobby, it stretches way, way beyond AIPAC to all these groups in every single state, groups on college campuses, and they work to basically shout down any criticism of Israel, shout down any support for Palestine. It is a huge, huge enterprise, and they do control vast amounts of resources, and they do, in fact, influence our government. Remember what they did to Cynthia McKinney. And attacks on Ilhan Omar seem to be less about protecting the Israel lobby, which is kind of an open secret, rather than to derail growing acknowledgement of the suffering of the Palestinian people, because that's what Israel is really worried about right now. They don't care about the fact that the American people know Israel is controlling the country. Remember that quote from Ariel Sharon from years ago on the radio saying, "We, the Jewish people, control America and the Americans know it." They don't really care. But what they're really afraid of is the growing global awareness of how the Palestinians are being made to suffer and the growing world sympathy as evidenced by the support for the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. Okay, so here's an interesting little article, came out of uns.com. Will diversity be the death of the Democrats? And obviously, both of our so-called traditional political parties are coalitions. But the Democratic Party lately has been building its political platform on diversity, racial, religious, ethnic, cultural, and says it's America's greatest strength. So the Democratic Party is home to a multitude of minorities. It's the domain of the LGBTQ movement. And in presidential elections, Democrats win 70% of Hispanics, Jews, and Asian Americans, and 90% of African Americans. But lately, as the party continues to divide up people and turn them one against the other, it looks like it might be in the process of taking itself apart, of getting so many people angry with each other, they're not even going to want to be in the Democratic Party with each other. So this could backflash on them tremendously. All right, let's take a phone call from Al in Canada. Aloha, Al. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Pardon me, I'm phoning to talk to you about the Jewish lobby groups. They're everywhere. They're all over the world.
Yes.
Look what happened with Arthur Topham and the Brene Brith up here in Canada. You know?
Yep.
I mean, how does this happen?
Well, it's a really good question, and it's obviously been building for a very, very long time. I mean, I remember, many, many years ago, the ADL was caught spying for Israel, spying on American citizens for Israel, and nothing happened to them. But they're obviously very much, they are in control of our government at so many levels. Look how many states have already signed on to these ridiculous laws saying that you can't support BDS and apply for state contracts. And it's rather stunning to see how all of these political people who are supposed to understand how the United States works, they're willing to throw away the First Amendment to please their Israeli masters. We really are under foreign puppet rule, and it's time for the American people to wake up to that and possibly get just a little bit angry about it.
Yeah. There's also the JDL, and actually our federal government just recently recognized it as a terrorist group.
Oh, that actually happened a while ago, and of course Israel is
in the
very
States
upset.
it did, yeah.
Yeah, but of course the corporate media doesn't report on that. But the JDL, has been accused of terrorism, and I'm trying to remember. There was this Irv Rubin, that was his name, was head of the JDL. Actually, was arrested for planning the murder of a Arab congressman. And the bombing of a mosque, but before he could get to trial, he was silenced in prison.
Yeah. I mean, it's a shame that people don't really pay attention to any of this stuff. And just to get slightly off that topic, but it's kind of still similar, is when Donald Trump was tweeting about the Federal Reserve, David Rothschild tweeted back and. Wow. Whoa.
Yeah, I remember that.
Look at that. Like, that's right out there.
Well, the private central banks are Israel's money machine. They suck the wealth out of nations, and then they use that wealth to buy that nation's government, and that's how they maintain control.
Yep, and they can just print whatever they want, and they're doing it again, right? I have QE to infinity. And it's not just your country, Mike. It's a lot of countries that are involved in this sort of thing. It doesn't matter if the central bank is private. They're still calling, the shots are still being called in Brussels. So, who are they working for? Not working for us.
No, they're not.
Working for the bankers.
Yeah. Government serves
the
money. Government serves the power.
That's it. Thanks a lot, Mike. I appreciate your time. You have a good show. I'm going to be listening.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. Well, that makes one there. Anyway, article coming out of TexasTribune.org. The blue dots in Texas red political sea. And this is an analysis, and it included this map about, Texas is traditionally Republican, but they had this district map showing where it had shifted over into Democratic country. And looking at that map, it's obvious that almost all the blue dots are right along that leaky border. It's a political invasion is what's going on. Now, there's been a lot of talk around the internet that Ruth Bader Ginsburg has actually already passed, and apparently it's been picked up by some of the independent media, and I urge caution on this one, that we not get set up for a huge embarrassment. But for what it's worth, the Daily Mail and other media institutes are reporting that Ginsburg was back at the Supreme Court today, and she apparently attended the justices' closed-door conference, at which they're weighing whether to add new cases and finalizing opinions in cases argued in the fall. Now, a lot of people are saying, well, why wasn't there a picture of her arriving or something like that? Because all of the pictures that were being used to illustrate these articles are stock shots from earlier. But I think at this point, I have to say, I understand people are concerned that if she passed away, there would be a strong motive for Democrats to want to hide that, to deny Donald Trump another conservative Supreme Court justice. And it wouldn't be all that far-fetched if you remember Generalissimo Francisco Franco in Spain, the dictator of Spain, and he died, and that was hidden for like months, and eventually became an ongoing joke at Saturday Night Live. So who knows what could happen. Maybe they went over to Westworld and had another Ruth Bader Ginsburg made up. But at this point, I'm not inclined to bite at these little bits of bait saying that she has passed away. And if she did make it back to the Supreme Court, good for her. Good for her. Okay. Turning to the war zones, of which there were a lot, and this next story is an illustration of why I thought it was unwise for Donald Trump to unwind Obama's attempt to normalize relations with Cuba. Cuba has gone public saying that the United States is moving special forces and preparing a Venezuelan intervention. And they're saying it's a covert plan to intervene under the pretext of the humanitarian crisis. And dovetailing with that, of course, AP is reporting a leaked State Department email that U.S. military aircraft are being ready to deliver 250 tons of humanitarian aid to the Venezuelan border, where supposedly Maduro cannot stop them. Humanitarian aid, guns, bullets, bombs, bandages, things like that. Wouldn't be the first time that weapons of war were being sent around the world disguised as humanitarian aid. All right, we're going to take another phone call here. Art off the grid, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, I want to talk about this declaration that Trump has just put out. I'm so fed up with this garbage. It is absolutely ridiculous. And I think it's about time in these next upcoming elections, we start to elect people that actually know and have a full comprehension of the Constitution and the authorities of the various positions, be it president, senator, whatever the case may be. In the previous broadcast with Mark Anderson, I mentioned the presidential authority on immigration and how he can control it. I should have been a little bit more clear. It's not in the Constitution. I actually went back and looked it up. It's in the Immigration Nationality Act, Section 212F, and it reads, whenever the president finds that the entry of any aliens or of any class of aliens to the United States would be detrimental to the interest of the United States, he may, by proclamation and for such period as he deemed necessary, suspend the entry of all aliens or any class of aliens as immigrants or non-immigrants, or impose on the entry of aliens any restrictions he may deem appropriate. Whenever the Attorney General finds that a commercial airline has failed to comply with regulations of the Attorney General relating to the requirement of the airlines for the detection of fraudulent documentation used by passengers traveling to the United States, including the training of personnel in such detection, the Attorney General may suspend the entry of some or all aliens transported to the United States by such airlines. There is your presidential authority right there in black and white. Ladies and gentlemen, take it for what it is. Donald Trump, pull your head out of that dark, dusky place you got it stuffed, get a whiff of fresh air, and do your damn job.
Okay, well, first of all, that's Title VIII. That's in there. We've talked about that on the show here before. Getting back to your first point about the next election, electing people who actually know the law and the Constitution, and it's amazing. We're still a little embarrassed out here in Hawaii that Macy Hirono didn't understand it actually is against the law to just step across the border into the United States. But unfortunately, we live in an age where elections are won and lost on the basis of style and image rather than substance. Now, it wasn't always that way when the country was brand new, before there was, radio and TV. Candidates had to give speeches. They had to demonstrate that they had a grasp of the situation. Elections were won and lost on oratory. And today they're won and lost on who's got the best clothing and the best hairstyle. And it ought not to be that way. The other problem is, of course, that long before you and I ever step into a voting booth, the candidates are already whittled down to those that are going to support the status quo. We saw that especially in 2016 when the Democratic National Committee rigged the primaries in favor of Hillary Clinton over Bernie Sanders. So our election system is a joke. Our political system is completely corrupted, and I wish we could fix it at the voting booth. But until that election system is overhauled, that's not going to be possible. And unfortunately, because so many of the people in our government benefit from election fraud, they're not going to do anything to fix it. I think that's why there was such a pushback against Donald Trump's Election Integrity Commission, to the point where he simply disbanded it and said the Department of Homeland Security will take care of election integrity. But all DHS did was go on out and do some computer security stuff on those electronic machines without addressing the issue that the software in the machine from the point of manufacture is already set to steal elections.
Yeah, unfortunately, I have to agree with you. And, you know, maybe there's got to be some way, and I wish somebody could could come up, or a group of somebody could come up with some way of remedying this by saying, you know, whenever they want to put somebody out there, you know, if we can, as a people, unite and stand up and say, look, unless you really understand this, you don't get our vote, and we will absolutely flatly refuse to recognize any authority you may try to claim you have until you get a clue. I mean, something's got to break at some point. Either we start holding these people accountable, we start getting people in there that actually know what they're doing, or we go for full-blown revolution. One way or another, this has got to end.
Well,
Thanks,
again,
Mike.
I'm opposed. Let me reiterate, I'm opposed to civil war or revolution. The wrong people get killed and crippled in those kinds of things. I still think that this country is headed to a Soviet Union-style collapse, and our best course of action is to be prepared to survive that period of difficulty while we, the people, get together and put together a new country, excluding the current members of our current government from taking part in that process. And that's going to be the hard part. I mean, Putin had to literally kick people out of the Russian republics to keep them from trying to take back over the place there. But again, the corporate media is supposed to hold our politicians accountable, but it doesn't. And so when you see a press conference, it's just another theater presentation where the prostitutes and correspondents ask these pre-planned softball questions to which the politicians will give a pre-planned answer. And the Americans think they're hearing a real debate and a real examination of the candidates, and they're not. They're not. And that's how we wind up with people like Sarah Palin and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, in positions of power. And by the way, have you noticed that ever since Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was elected, people have stopped telling dumb blonde jokes? Okay, I guess that one didn't work. All right, well, thank you for the phone call, Art. We're going to let you go here and take another break for commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and an update from Aurora, Illinois. And when this story was first breaking, the facility was described as a warehouse, the Henry Pratt warehouse. Turns out that was a misreport. It's actually a manufacturing facility. That's why there were so many people around for this shooter to shoot at. There is a report that a coroner is now on the scene, so there may have been at least one death. But everybody else is wounded, non-life threatening. The police are saying that their 4 officers were wounded, not seriously. So again, they are not identifying who the shooter is or what his motive was, but he did apparently work at that factory. So it's some kind of disgruntled employee situation. And again, I want to find out, was this guy on prescription antidepressants? Because we know those have been a factor in so many of these tragic incidents here. Getting on back to the war zones here, Venezuela has basically announced they are forming an anti-U.S. coalition to oppose a military intervention and support Maduro as the legitimate president of Venezuela. And apparently there are more than 50 countries hopping on board the coalition, including Russia, Cuba, China, Iran. And they're saying they're doing so to defend the key principles of the United Nations Charter, which are being violated by the United States in Venezuela, not to mention several other countries. This coalition is less about Venezuela and more about we need to get the rule of international law back. Because the real rogue nation in the world today is the United States. story out of the original antiwar.com. American politicians from the two main parties have found something they can agree on. Oh, more interventions in Venezuela. And again, they're out there saying, oh, it's a humanitarian crisis. Well, that's the result of decades of economic war by the United States against Venezuela. And the usual canard that they come on out, we have to bring democracy to Venezuela, ignoring the fact that Maduro was elected in presidential elections deemed transparent by international observers in May of last year. And have you ever noticed that every time the United States goes in, into another country to bring them democracy, what actually emerges is a dictatorship? It may try and make itself look like a democracy. They might have elections with just one candidate on the ballot. But think Shah of Iran or the dictator Pinochet, and you'll get the idea of how this goes. No, we're not in the business of bringing democracy to the world. The United States is in the business of crushing real democracy around the world to make the world safe for corporate greed. Now, John Bolton is out there once again shaking his fist and screaming at the rest of the world, don't you dare buy Venezuelan oil. Don't you dare do it. Don't you dare do it. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Over in Syria, the U.S. commander who's been leading the war against ISIS is out there on CNN saying that he disagrees with Donald Trump's decision to pull troops out of Syria and warned that the terror group was far from defeated, which is kind of pushing it because as of last report, ISIS is down to a single square mile of territory, which is not a strong position. But Joseph Votel also said the U.S.-backed forces on the ground in Syria were not ready to handle the threat of ISIS on their own. Actually, Russia and Syria did a really good job of that. You know what's really going on here. If Trump pulls out of Syria, Votel's out of a job. That's one of the reasons you should be very cautious about anybody in the military saying, we must, stay in the fight. We must go here. We must go. It's their job, their promotions. And do you all remember MASH? Was a very popular TV series, was based on a movie, which was actually based on a book that was supposedly true. And in the movie, the guy playing the colonel would begin every one of his speeches in the dark days before Pearl Harbor. And that was a head scratcher. And then I got to work with the actor who played that role on a later project. And I said, what did that mean? And he said, well, because from the colonel's point of view, before Pearl Harbor, nobody was getting promoted. There was no money for any kind of equipment or anything. Everybody was just sitting around. And after Pearl Harbor, everybody was getting promotions and money. So there you go. Now, Russia is saying so far there are no signs of U.S. troop withdrawal from Syria, even though, in theory, Donald Trump has issued the order, trying to fulfill his campaign promise to get us out of some of these places here. Now, Senator Lindsey Graham is out there saying, well, first we need to find some of our European allies to send their troops in to replace the U.S. forces. And I don't think he's going to get a lot of support from that. Maybe Britain, maybe France, maybe Germany. But I think pretty much everybody in Europe is fed up with Syria. It's a losing proposition. And again, none of those allies the U.S. wants to send into Syria have the permission of the Syrian government to be there. Now, Graham is saying the purpose is a lean, joint military presence to enforce a safe zone that would protect the American-backed Kurdish forces in Syria from Turkey, watch for the reemergence of ISIS, and buy time for a Syria peace process in Geneva. Well, last I heard, that peace process in Geneva is going along pretty well. And I don't think it's going to need a lot of time. Pardon me. Yesterday, Valentine's Day, the Syrian Arab Army, and remember, that is the official army of Syria. There are so many of these groups running around, you have to keep them sorted out. Anyway, the Syrian army ambushed an ISIS unit in the Damascus desert, killing several of the terrorists, and they captured a large number of weapons and equipment, including a Konkurs anti-tank guided missile launcher, several RPG-7 launchers, several machine guns, mortars, a satellite communication system, and 2 vehicles. And according to the Syrian army, the ISIS unit was likely attempting to smuggle those weapons and equipment to ISIS cells operating near the area of Al-Tanf. Excuse me there. In northern Hama and southern Idlib, the Syrian army repelled several infiltration attempts by the Turkestan Islamic Party and Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. And both groups have recently expanded their influence within the Idlib demilitarized zone, which has been demilitarized only by name so far. Anyway, something that I'm sure the corporate media is glad not to have to report on today, or will not report on today, was this conference in Warsaw. Was supposed to be the Conference on Middle Eastern Security, but as it turned out, the U.S. admitted it was about reinstating the U.S. lead role in diplomacy for the Mideast. In other words, we're back in charge, guys. No making deals amongst yourself, no more treaties and no more currency deals or anything. We're back here in charge. And apparently this forum was planned last year by the Trump administration to bring Washington back in from the diplomatic cold, which it created for itself when it abandoned the P5+1 deal with Iran. So the tearing up of that deal isolated the U.S. from the other signatories, Russia, China, and the Europeans. And so by holding this high-level conference on Iran, the idea was to burnish Washington's diplomatic standing in the Middle East. The problem is that participants, and there were representatives from something like 60 countries there, the participants saw the real agenda was an attempt by Washington to try and bolster international support to go after Iran. More economic sanctions followed by eventual actual war. And they really didn't want to hear about that. And a lot of observers are saying this thing really didn't work. In fact, there was another article out of Sputnik News saying that the conference went off the rails, and they're putting the blame on Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who just went over the top, jumping the shark with all of his talk about, how evil Iran was, and they wanted to bring back the Holocaust, and they wanted to kill all the Jews in the world, and those evil imams. And having heard all of that before, back during the run-up to the 2009 attempted coup d'etat in Iran, people really weren't buying into that. So Pompeo wants to confront Iran, but how can he do it without the support of the rest of the nations in the Middle East? Because it looks like that they didn't get any traction. It was a bust. The whole thing was a bust, and the U.S. is still isolated from the Middle East, except, of course, for Israel, which loves us as long as we give them money and weapons and let our kids fight in their wars. We're going to do a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Another little article here. This is out of Ynet News, and it's asking, will Netanyahu's grandstanding up in Warsaw help or hinder him? Because he's got an election coming up here. And they start out by referencing the 1996 Sharm el-Sheikh conference that was supposed to help Shimon Peres keep his prime minister's chair and save the peace process. And they're saying, will this work? But unfortunately, no world leaders came to Netanyahu's aid in Warsaw. So it looks like he's just as isolated now as the rest of the United States. And it didn't help when Netanyahu made a comment about how Poland cooperated with Germany during the Holocaust, which they most certainly did not. And by the way, lest you fall into the corporate media illusion that all those German slave labor camps were filled with nothing but Israelis. Actually, Israelis were a minority population. They were filled with Poles, they were filled with gypsies, they were filled with gays, they were filled with mentally retarded, they were filled with anybody that Germany felt didn't deserve to be in German society. And there were a lot of Poles in there. So for Netanyahu to make that comment, needless to say, it irked the Poles tremendously. And Netanyahu said, well, I'd like to clarify that. And we don't know what the clarification was, but the Polish government came on out and said they were happy with that. Now, needless to say, Netanyahu's call for war with Iran at this summit has sparked a backlash from Tehran. Now, to be fair, the government of Israel has pulled back from that, saying that it was a mistranslation. Netanyahu was speaking and tweeting in Hebrew, and the translations were botched. And so war with Iran, according to one source, is now combating Iran. According to another source, it's the struggle with Iran. But needless to say, Tehran is saying that first one is probably the correct one, because that's what Israel has been saying for decades, that Iran is a danger, Iran is a threat, Iran has to be destroyed. Iran is just weeks away from having a nuclear bomb that they're going to use on Israel. And they've been saying Iran is weeks away from a nuclear bomb for 30 years now. And as we all know now, Iran didn't build a nuclear weapon, wasn't building a nuclear weapon. And even if Iran had a nuclear weapon, they're not just going to haul off and nuke Israel, because Israel has hundreds and hundreds of nuclear weapons backed up by the nuclear arsenal of the United States of America. And the Iranians are not warlike. They have not initiated a war of conquest against another nation in 200 years. All right, let's take a phone call from Gary in Arkansas. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
I'm a little behind. The phones are kind of screwed up today, but I wanted to go back to the voting machine thing. It is my understanding that these voting machines have a telephone line connected to them. Now, that machine should be a standalone item, and there shouldn't be any telephone communications in or out of the machine until they tally them at the end. I think that's where the problem is.
There's a lot of different problems. There's a lot of different problems. They shouldn't be connected to telephone lines. Even worse, it came on out that a lot of these electronic voting machines have built-in Wi-Fi. They're not supposed to. Now, the manufacturers of these voting machines are saying the Wi-Fi is just there for technicians to have a quick and easy way to perform diagnostics and adjustments. But obviously, it could be another way to get on in and adjust the results. Over at blackboxvoting.org, Bev Harris has documented how these electronic machines are designed to steal elections, and she focuses on the machines that were made by the Diebold Corporation using a software system called GEMS. And owing to carelessness over at Diebold, the source code for the GEMS software was left out there on a public FTP server, and Bev Harris downloaded a copy. Diebold tried to take her to court and say that she stole the software from them, and get an injunction against her making it public, but the court said no, that was just out there on the net. It's like if somebody leaves a donut out on the porch rail, it's not really stealing if somebody takes it. So, just going through the GEMS software, Bev Harris found no less than 12 different ways to change the election outcome and not leave a trace.
I know one thing, that the ATMs made by Diebold never make a mistake at the bank.
That's exactly right, which is why if these electronic voting machines are this crooked, it had to be by design. And there was a huge, huge fight by all of these electronic voting machine companies to keep the inner workings of these machines top secret. There were all kinds of voter integrity groups, voter rights groups who were saying, look, all these things do are count button presses or holes in card. Why is it such a big hush-hush secret? And so the electronic voting machine company said, look, we'll set up another company, an independent company, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, say no more, that will independently validate that these machines are very accurate. But it doesn't really matter because, first of all, the machine can have an honest mode, and then by simply sending a single card through it, it can be flipped into crooked mode.
Yeah, there's so many problems with this. I'm in favor of paper ballots, and those ballots are counted at the precinct and never leave it, and the tally is shown up on a screen after they're all counted, and they have both parties present, etc., and they have a foreman, and, the old-fashioned way.
I agree with you. In fact, if you'll go over to my website, whatreallyhappened.com, at the extreme upper left, underneath that hopelessly outdated photo of myself, you will see there's an article, How to Have Honest Elections. And it lays out a recipe for having honest elections. And ever since I put it out there, I've received emails from people in other countries saying, our election system is very much like that, and it works. So we could have an honest election system. And this one could definitely work. I'm not saying it's perfect, but it makes election fraud extraordinarily difficult to carry out and very easy to detect, as opposed to our current system, which seems to intentionally designed to facilitate and then conceal massive election fraud.
Isn't it interesting that the host, the guest, and the listening audience all have solutions, and most of them are very good solutions to all these problems, yet the senators and congressmen can't figure it out.
They don't want to figure it out. They're the beneficiaries of this crooked election system. They want to have a political system where the big money people can literally buy the elections, and of course, then Congress will do favors for the big money donors. Right now, our government serves the money. It serves the power. It doesn't serve the American people. It hasn't served the American people since before the Civil War.
It doesn't serve me. No, it doesn't serve me at all. I'm just a little Social Security cashier. But I'll tell you one thing. I paid all that money in for my health care and my Social Security check. So they act like it's a gift to me. That's horse-pucky.
Yeah, it is.
I paid that money in. There ought to have been interest accrued on it. They borrowed and stolen out of the Social Security fund. It's pitiful. I've had my say. Thank you. It's a very good show.
All right. Thank you very much. And yeah, that's the way government actually works. I mean, it's not like the government makes any of its own money. They take it from one group of people, and then they give it to another group of people and say, here is our gift to you. Vote for me next election. That's how this whole thing works. All righty, getting on back to Israel and Palestine, there's a very troubling YouTube video, and it's talking about how Israel's siege on the Gaza Strip is making it difficult, if not impossible, for cancer patients to receive any kind of treatment. Now, over the last, I think it's 11 years now, Israel has controlled and restricted everything going into Gaza. And very often it causes severe drug shortages in Gaza hospitals. It's also been a real problem with all the people being wounded in these Great March of Return protests who are being shot by the Israelis. They don't have enough materials to treat them as well. But getting on back to the cancer treatment, they're talking about these patients who are being turned away because the hospitals just don't have the cancer treatment medicine. And basically, it amounts to a very slow death sentence. Now, here's the point I would like to make. Israel justifies the blockade of Gaza by saying it must restrict materials that Hamas could turn into weapons. But how does one make a weapon out of cancer medications? Just something to think about. We have another article about cancer medications further on down that might actually put a different perspective on this. Okay, former Israeli Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman yesterday is out there saying that the next confrontation with the Gaza Strip must be the last. In other words, he is advocating for Israel to simply go on in and take over the place and make it part of Israel again and just get it over and done with. And so Lieberman is basically out there saying that, you've got this great march of return along the Gaza Strip border fence, and saying this is leading to a major escalation with the Palestinians in Gaza. And he says it's going to happen within the next year. And he says it's time to just put an end to this. So he's out there openly talking about, the final solution to the Palestinian question. He's talking about genocide. And of course, the American corporate media isn't going to say anything about it whatsoever. Meanwhile, ever since the international observers have been kicked out of Hebron, the illegal settlers are apparently going on rampages. They're marching through the city shouting death to Arabs and Palestinians must leave and we want you all to die and things like that. Shades of crystal knocked. Okay, we're going to take another break for commercials and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And I want to share something with you. A couple of days ago, I got an email from somebody saying, I would like to donate, but I don't have a lot. I could send a few bucks. And my response to that is, yeah, if you can spare it. There's no such thing as too small of a donation. And I shudder to think that there are people out there who want to support Republic Broadcasting who are hesitant to do so because they feel ashamed that they can't send something sizable. But, there is strength in numbers. And if everybody listening to this broadcast right now, and I mean every single one of you, sent Republic Broadcasting just $5, what an impact that would have. So get your paper and pencil out there. I'm going to give you the postal address to support Republic Broadcasting. The postal address is Republic Broadcasting Network, 2251 Double Creek Drive, number 302, Round Rock, Texas, 78664. The phone number where you can make a credit card or debit card donation or pledge to be a recurring subscriber is 800-724-2719, extension 1 during business hours, extension 3 at all other times. And that's today's message here. There is no such thing as too small a donation. What really happened gets donations of $1, and we're grateful for every bit of it because every bit of it does help. So thank you. The network thanks you. Getting on back to the news here. Over in the Gaza Strip, since we're talking about that, Israeli forces continue to use lethal force against the participants in the peaceful protests organized along the Gaza Strip borders. This is now the 46th week, coming up on the first year anniversary, along the eastern and northern border area of the Gaza Strip. And the Israeli forces are also continuing to use armed force as well during the incursions into the West Bank. In the Gaza Strip, Israeli forces killed Hamza Mohammed Ishtawa, 17-year-old, Hassan Ayad Shalabi, 14-year-old, while and they were just participating in the return and breaking the siege march east of Gaza. And eyewitness said the civilians killed did not pose any threat to the soldiers' life. Remember, these soldiers have bunkers that they're firing from. They're not at any risk. And these are peaceful demonstrators. One Palestinian child, 16-year-old Hassan Nabil Ahmad Nofal, was 150 meters away from the fence when he was killed by Israeli soldiers. So, anyway, Israel may look to expand their covert war against Iran beyond Syria. Well, there's nothing covert about it. Every time Israel goes in to blow up some part of Syria, they're saying, oh, we're only hitting the Iranians. We're only hitting the Iranians. And Israel is always at some kind of war with Iran. They have been for decades, which is why Iran reacted to Netanyahu's comment up there in Warsaw. But ISIS is defeated, and like everyone else, Iran is scaling back its involvement in Syria. That's giving Israel fewer targets, and that's not what Netanyahu needs right now. He needs to be out there with the bombs and the blood and the smoke to try and build up the war fever to help his election opportunity. So now he's out there saying, well, we're going to have to look for Iranian targets in other countries. And so now we're getting a threat that Israel may attack what they are claiming are Iranian bases in Iraq. And no matter what you call it, however Israel justifies it, this is Israel dropping bombs on other countries. Technically, it's an act of war. And of course, what keeps those other countries from fighting back is the awareness of Israel's nuclear arsenal. I think that's why John F. Kennedy worked so hard to prevent Israel from acquiring nuclear weapons. He could see what was likely to happen. And I think the fact that Kennedy refused to allow Israel to have nuclear weapons was one of the many motives for his assassination. Okay, over in Germany, they're kicking off the Munich Security Conference, and it's going to be about transatlantic cooperation and consequences of a possible restart of superpower competition. Well, I don't think there's anything about possible. It's definitely underway. So the Munich Security Report is out there, and basically what it's talking about is that all of the countries who are not superpowers are getting very, very nervous about just how their countries and economies and populations are going to be impacted by all of this. Well, if it breaks into a full-blown World War III, yeah, a lot of it is going to get fought on European soil, just like a lot of World War I was fought on European soil, and a lot of World War II was fought on European soil. And I think the Europeans are probably a little bit annoyed that it may well happen again. We have to take another break here for commercials. We have another caller waiting on the line, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Trump made a speech earlier today, and I didn't get to watch it because I was doing show prep. But apparently, during this speech, he made a very obvious bid to get a Nobel Peace Prize. And I think this is illustrates that Trump is being driven a lot by his own ego. And apparently he made a big deal about how Obama got the Nobel Peace Prize. He was in the Oval Office for just a short time, and he got the Peace Prize. And even Obama said, "What did I get it for?" And he went on to say, "I probably will never get it, but if you look at the Idlib province in Syria, I stopped the slaughter of perhaps 3 million people. Nobody talks about that." Donald, that's not very presidential to do that. Anyway. All right, let's take a couple of phone calls here. Joe in Tennessee, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, if he keeps making peace with the North Koreans, I think he definitely deserves a Nobel Peace Prize for that. And if, there's been a war going on for over 70 years now. So I would definitely think that he would deserve it if he does.
I want to look at the total. I want to look at the total war-peace balance of the administration before I start recommending for a Nobel Peace Prize. Even though in recent years the Nobel Peace Prize has actually become a joke, if for no other reason than it was just handed to Obama for no particular reason other than politics. They gave one to Al Gore, actually. To Al Gore accepted it on behalf of somebody else. They've given it to people like Henry Kissinger, who was definitely a war criminal. There are countries on earth Kissinger cannot set foot in. He'll be arrested immediately. So, and again, this is one of those things that are handed out to get you to think, oh, I should listen to this person because they've got this gold thing on the wall or on the shelf. And don't listen to people who don't have plaques and medals and stuff because obviously they don't rate in our society.
Well, if giving him the Nobel Peace Prize prevents him from starting any more wars, I'm all for giving it to him. So
didn't work for Obama. Didn't work with Obama. They gave him the Nobel Peace Prize, and he was out there, with all this stuff going on.
Yep. Hey, I watched the press conference after his speech, and it was interesting to me that, of course, the lapdog media, deep state lapdog media, and I didn't ask one question about the FBI coup attempt and the 25th Amendment. Against Trump, and it's just interesting to me. Like, that should be one of the biggest stories out there. But of course, the left or deep state controlled media, CIA controlled Mouthpiece Mockingbird media, didn't ask anything about that. And in a way, you have to blame Trump for that, because he's been in office for 2 years and he has really done nothing to put right-leaning journalists and libertarian journalists in the presidential press pool. So he's going to be getting asked all these left questions or deep state, really, because they're not left. They're really deep state, CIA. And it's really his fault on that. And it's kind of sad to see, because he has control over that press pool. He could be feeding it with really people.
Not really, because I think what happened, I mean, when Trump first came into the White House, there was talk about how some of the stars of the independent media were going to be given press credentials, especially Alex Jones. But my understanding is that the current corporate media basically sent a message, we'll walk out if you do that, or at the very least, if you think you've been treated badly by the corporate media, it's going to get a lot worse. And so the corporate media basically exerted their control over that press room.
Well, that's a shame, because he is the president. He should just tell them, well, go ahead and walk. The other thing I wanted to bring up quick was Nancy Pelosi's brooch. I don't know if you've been seeing that, but she's got the old fascies gold brooch on her lapel. And it's you want to talk about left-wing fascism right in your face. I mean, that's what fascism derives from, the bundle of sticks called the fasci, which is Latin, which is what she's wearing on her pin. She's trying to show that she's powerful. She's sending out a message. She is, people.
But don't forget, on the front of the House of Representatives, on either side of the dais, there are two fascies on the wall. It is the symbol of the House of Representatives.
That, yeah. But, I mean, to me, it's like her wearing that. If it was somebody from the right wearing that, the left would be going completely crazy and calling them fascists, because it is a fascist symbol.
Well, I think
Pelosi's wearing it and sending
I think her message is she's Speaker of the House. That's why she's wearing it. And that is the symbol of the House of Representatives.
Well, I think a little deeper than that. I think these people are very symbol alert. I mean, they're very literate when it comes to symbology, and they send messages. I think ever since she was reelected as Speaker, she's been trying to pretend like she's in charge. She's the president.
Oh yeah,
she's trying to usurp more power, and this is a power move to me. It's more than just a decorative choice, or she's definitely trying to send a message. And there's a lot of occultic things that go on in government and in the secret societies and all and I think that you have to look for these symbols and look deeper in what's going on here. I mean, Trump is a Freemason. The Pelosi comes from a mafia Illuminati family. So there's a lot of I dabble in this stuff. But I'm curious by it. And to me, it's very in your face. She wore it at the State of the Union. She wore it the other day. She never wore it before. I mean, she was Speaker, when Obama was president. I never saw her wearing that brooch. So, I think there's more of a power play here than,
Well, there's no question about that. There was that quote that Nancy Pelosi, in an interview, came out and claimed that the Constitution says the Speaker of the House is equal to the President, which is definitely not in the Constitution. Anyway, Joe, I need to let you go. We're going to take one more phone call, then we're going to close the lines, because I got a lot of news to get through before the lovely Lady Claire arrives here. So let's go to Billy in Pennsylvania. Aloha, Billy. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, buddy. I haven't called in for a while. Love your show. Hope Claire's doing better.
She is.
Yeah, that's great, man. Because I heard from your other shows she was sick or something. I hope she's doing better.
No, about a year ago, she suffered a serious back injury, a fracture, And but in the last month, she's really started to show some real improvement.
Oh, that's great, man. I wish the best for both of you. You're like a true patriot. So
thank you.
Love your show. It just really pains me to say this, but because I really, when he came down the escalator and started saying everything that everybody was scared to say, I was really, I still love Donald Trump, but I'm very, very disappointed on what's going on with the wall thing. So I personally went down to Spencer's Gifts, and they had a doormat with his picture on it, and I bought a copy of Art of the Deal, and I sent it to the White House with a little note that said, "What happened to that guy?"
Yeah, good question. What happened to that manager that we saw on The Apprentice? We'd like to see him again, and now he's out there saying, "Please give me a Nobel Peace Prize. Please, sir, I want a Nobel Peace Prize."
And it pains me to say this, but if he really is that great of a negotiator and a businessman, why are you putting us through this? Because it ain't all about you and the Democrats. It's about us. We need that wall. It's like, if you really are that good, stop being a doormat for these people and stop caring about what they say. One more thing, boss. Alex Jones had this segment on Bob Mueller that I've been trying to call Alex Jones with this idea to try to put a bug in his ear saying, that was a great thing that you just did, but you really should do a documentary on all these rats, all of them, like the Rat Pack. Call it the Rat Pack. No disrespect against Sinatra and his guys, but call it the Rat Pack, and do a documentary on, all of them. Loretta Lynch, all of them. The Clintons, all of them, and just run it all the time. Just keep running it, and each, and then focus, because the more they don't bring these crimes to everyone's attention, they're just letting them, ride the bus down the street, and everyone's going to forget about it, focusing on all these stupid things like that governor or senator that's talking all this, crazy liberal stuff about green this and green that, while the real criminals, the attention's getting taken off of them.
Yeah, that's what the corporate media is supposed to do.
Other Rivero Rangers hear this, call Jones, and maybe he can do that. Or can you do that yourself, sir?
Not really. Alex Jones and I, we used to be friends. In fact, he actually got me started in talk radio, a little more than 10 years ago, for which I'm grateful. But we parted ways over our respective views of Israel. And so I still have a high regard for Alex Jones, but he's not going to want to hear from me or anybody who supports me. Anyway, Billy, we got to let you go. We're running short on time, and I've got some news I want to get to before the lovely Lady Claire joins us. So we're going to close the phone lines right now. A former head of NATO's military committee has slammed the U.S. withdrawal from the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, saying it's extremely dangerous for Europe. And this comes after Washington had suspended its obligations under the agreement that ended the arms race between the East and West back in the 1980s. Now, at this point, both the head of NATO and Russia are saying they have no intentions of starting to build and deploy new missiles. Whether the United States will unilaterally do so, of course, looks like they might, because apparently they're already tooling up this factory out in Arizona. But apparently, retired Air Force General Harold Kujat has sharply criticized the U.S. for terminating the INF Treaty, calling the move a betrayal of the security of the European allies. So everybody is looking at what's going on with all these treaties that are being withdrawn. P5+1 INF, the ABM Treaty. Okay. Apparently, Libya's coming up on their elections, and they are already expressing concern that the United States will try to interfere in the Libyan elections in order to get a U.S.-friendly government into power. Why? To get control over the oil and what currency it is going to be sold for. So, anyway. The Spanish Prime Minister has called for general elections for the 28th of April, and right now there's a big brouhaha over in Spain. The Catalans want independence. The majority of Spain are opposed to that idea. There have been massive protests in Madrid. Over in France, during the Yellow Vest protests, apparently France has arrested and convicted about 1,800 Yellow Vest members so far. And that does not include the people who've been wounded by these pepper spray balls that can actually blind people. So that's still going on. Now, the CIA is saying that Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman ordered the Khashoggi hit, but according to John Kiriakou, don't expect Saudi-U.S. relations to change, because all that money and all that oil and all that strategic control of the region is far more important than, you know, a little death by torture situation kind of thing here. Jared Kushner has announced that the Trump peace plan won't include the Saudi initiative. Now, what he means by that is the Saudi initiative was back in 2002, is the basis of the two-state solution. So Kushner has basically said that Trump's deal of the century is calling for a single state of Israel. And if the Palestinians give up their right to return, basically it's going to be a green light for Israel to say, well, Gaza and the West Bank now belong to us, which they've already been saying it for quite a while. Anyway, now over in Bahrain, Foreign Minister Khalid bin Ahmed Al Khalifa basically came on out and said that the only thing preventing Israeli-Palestinian peace is Iran's toxic money. Oh, yes, it's Iran is what's preventing there from being peace between Israel and Palestine, which is utterly ridiculous, and Bahrain is kowtowing to Israel. We all know that Israel doesn't want peace with the Palestinians. They want the Palestinians to leave. Israel's idea of Mideast peace is we want that piece over there, and then we want this piece here, and then we want this piece here. It's the Golan over here, and then we're going to take a piece of Lebanon, and then we want a bigger piece of the West Bank. That's Israel's idea of Mideast peace here. Mike Pompeo is out there stating that the United States wants to, quote, get as far down the road as we can, end quote, ahead of a summit with North Korea in Vietnam this month. And Pompeo says he's sending his team back to Asia for further discussions around all issues discussed at the groundbreaking Singapore summit last June between Trump and Kim Jong-un. So Pompeo wants to sort of preload the discussion as hard as they can in favor of the U.S. But Trump is saying that, yes, he will meet with North Korea's Kim Jong-un in Vietnam on February 27th and 28th. And I don't know that anything is going to come of it. And of course, Kim Jong-un's stature in the world goes up every time he gets to meet with the President of the United States of America. But there is still this impasse in that North Korea has made several gestures to go along with what Trump and Kim Jong-un discussed. They've closed down their nuclear test site. They've dismantled a rocket test stand. They returned the remains of American soldiers who had died in North Korea, and now they're waiting for the United States to offer some kind of a gesture in return, and it's not coming because the U.S. attitude is you give us everything we want first, then maybe we'll do something nice for you. It's a bad habit they've picked up from Israeli negotiators. Meanwhile, North Korea, possibly expecting that things are not going to work out all that well, is now working on sanctions-proof energy technologies, and they're focusing on two different areas: tidal power and coal-based synthetic fuels that could greatly improve living standards and reduce its reliance on oil imports and thus its vulnerability to sanctions. And apparently finding an energy source that isn't vulnerable to sanctions has been a top priority for North Korean officials for quite some time. And Kim Jong-un used his New Year's address last month to call on the country to radically increase their production of electricity. Now, North Korea is not doing any more development on nuclear energy as part of their discussions with Trump. But tidal power can be made to work, and it is clean. We'll be right back after these few words. And And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And we're coming up at the top of the hour and the lovely Lady Claire. We've been talking a lot about Russia's new out-of-the-box weapons, and we keep hearing more and more about them. Apparently, Russia has a new stealthy strike unmanned aerial vehicle, and it apparently is quite potent. And it's called the S-70 Okhotnik B, and its first flight is planned for later this year. And it's an independent design. It's not a carbon copy of the Neuron or the X-47B. Remember when Iran hacked a U.S. drone and brought it down? Immediately that technology was spread on out, and everybody said, oh, they're going to be making copies of it. No, this is something new. And apparently this is very, very stealthy drone, even down into the infrared. It's able to greatly reduce the heat of its turbofan exhaust, and it flies at high subsonic speeds. Apparently it's got an afterburner, which says it might actually be capable of supersonic speeds, but why would you do that if you're trying to be stealthy? Because you're going to be leaving shockwaves all over the place. Apparently it also has onboard radar, so it's quite sophisticated. Meanwhile, the Department of Defense is going to begin negotiations to start buying 485 Lockheed Martin F-35s. Ooh, lots and lots of planes here. 485 of them. They still can't get them to work, but let's go ahead and give them money anyway. And the Joint Program Office is saying they're not going to speculate about prices during the negotiations. They're hoping to keep it somewhere around $80 million a unit, but they expect the price of the F-35A to fall. Well, that's nonsense. No weapons platform ever drops in price. The defense contractors will add stuff onto it and say, oh, well, we had to upgrade this and add this, and sorry, the price is a little higher in the next unit of it here. All right, we're going to get a little bit of economic news in here before the top of the hour. The retail apocalypse is greatly accelerating in the early stages of 2019. People just don't have any money. They're starting to talk about Carmageddon again as well. Payless is going to close all 2,300 of their stores amid their bankruptcy plans. Payless has been trying to locate a buyer, but nobody wants to buy the company. And yet the government and the corporate media keep telling us the economy is fine. The economy is fine. Now, amazingly, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez cheered the decision by Amazon to scrap its plans to build an outpost in New York that could have created 25,000 jobs. And now we're getting word that Amazon does not have a plan to build it anywhere else. So it may be a signal that Amazon is expecting a slowdown in business. And they want to be concerned about costs here. We were talking about all the millions of Americans who are 3 months behind in their car loans. There's now a surge in delinquencies, and that may threaten the auto loan bubble. Okay, there's the music time for station identification. We'll be back with hour number 3 after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. And for those of you watching on YouTube, yes, we are wearing our yellow vests, which were sent to us as a gift from one of our listeners, and we're very, very grateful.
Yes.
Yes. So we are in our new raiment here, as it were.
Yes. And as they say in France, liberté, égalité, fraternité, sororité, et seulement la paix. Seulement la paix. What I just said in French, liberty, equality, brotherhood, sisterhood, and peace.
Peace, especially peace. We need a lot of peace right now here.
Yeah.
Okay, so what's the first thing you want to talk about here?
I wanted to talk about President Trump's coming up on the aspect of AI for the military.
Yes.
That was kind of an interesting place that he put it, because he made the observation that it's going to affect every single facet of theater of war out there.
Well, it sounds really good, and I know it's going to result in a lot of funding for AI research, which Trump has already made a priority so that we can maintain an edge in that technology. But unfortunately, the real world is that the U.S. military has not had a lot of luck producing solid, reliable software. We know that it was a software error that led the USS Vincennes to kill that Iranian passenger jet.
Yeah.
We know it was a software error that was probably behind the accidental shootdown of TWA 800.
Yes.
We know that the software for the F-35 is still said to be years away from being perfected. And these are non-AI applications. And given that AI can operate and change its own code and learn faster than humans can keep up, I'm a little concerned about this, that we may be getting into a technology that, as so many science fiction movies like to portray, could get out of our control very quickly.
Absolutely. And there have been some stories on the potential for what they called killer robots who just take over and decide we're not useful anymore.
That could very well be. And some of the early AI experiments have shown these systems can just go off into completely unpredictable areas. There was some early experiments with AI natural speech processors where they had these two AIs talking back and forth. And in one experiment, they simply evolved their own language, which people couldn't understand. And in another one, one of the AIs went the computer equivalent of psychotic and just started screaming obscenities and "I want to kill you." And so, I'm a little concerned about this. That we're basically handing this kind of technology over to our weapons systems. And we're obviously not the first people to be concerned about this. I mean, iRobot is a good example. The film version, not the Isaac Asimov original. War Games, Colossus, the Forbin Project, and of course all the James Cameron Terminator movies.
Yes, absolutely. But hopefully, if they can get it under control, it sounds like something that would really be wonderful.
Well, it's interesting technology, but again, the idea that it's being applied to machinery designed to kill people and blow large holes in other people's property, I'm a little less enthusiastic about it. I'm certainly looking at some of the other AI applications which are more beneficial to the human race.
Well, what would those be, in your opinion?
Well, take your sip of water and let's get your microphone back up so that we can hear you. Okay. Here we are.
Sorry, folks.
Yeah. Well, we know that AI is, they're trying to use AI for the development of new medications. They're trying to use AI basically to design new AI, which has its own problems, potential issues. They're now applying AI to the financial markets. And I think there's an illustration there of why AI in the military may have a problem, because we're seeing in the financial markets the high-frequency trading systems, which are starting to use AI, they're programmed with one goal: make more money, make more earnings, and everything that they're oblivious to everything else around them, including whether or not the actions and trades they're carrying out are ruining lives for ordinary people as companies are driven out of business. So let's take that paradigm into warfare, where these AIs are designed to simply kill the enemy no matter what, and any other concerns around them, such as civilian populations, natural wonders.
How will they be able to determine? That is an issue.
They may not care. And again, I think Cameron was being very, very prescient with his Terminator movie.
Yes, absolutely. I'd like to take a look at economy in the East, in Asia. And this comes to us from Zero Hedge, generally a very thoughtful and well-written blog. Tyler Durden is the nom de plume. There are several people who write under that name. But they're talking about the Shanghai Accord 2.0, and apparently what the Chinese bank has done in late December, when traders were away. The PBOC indicated that they were going to have a big shift in the official monetary policy description at the December Central Economic Work Conference, from prudent and neutral to prudent with appropriate looseness and tightness. And that's kind of a really strange slip of the tongue there. And apparently this is the new description. It sounds very much similar to what was adopted in 2015, just as their monetary policy eased significantly and ahead of the famous Shanghai Accord of January 2016, when the world was on a real path to a bear market. A coordinated response from G7 leaders in China sparked a massive rally in stocks. And what China did was to unleash another massive credit injection burst, which impacted the global economy for the next year. And as Goldman said at the time, such official policy language, while subtle, can carry important information about the monetary policy stance. Mike, what do you think about this?
It's sounding to me like China is going down the quantitative easing route. Mm-hmm. And of course, with the economy so globally linked, when something happens in any one of the large economies, it can send shockwaves through the rest of the world's economies. And right now, it's one thing to have this massive credit injection and use it to bolster the stock market. Mm-hmm. It's not going to really have a significant impact on the lives of ordinary people. Mm-hmm. And this is just another instance of how the world of finance and economics continues to disconnect from ordinary people.
Mm-hmm. That does not sound like it's going to have an ultimate good outcome. It can't.
No, it isn't, and we're seeing it now here in the United States, where Wall Street is still having a real good time. The Federal Reserve is keeping them propped up, and the news is saying the economy is great, and yet we're seeing consumer spending continue to decline. Mm-hmm. Delinquencies on car loans, delinquencies on mortgages. Everybody is just buried in debt with no way to pay it off. Mm-hmm. And the financial elites are oblivious. They really don't care. They're getting their wealth, even though much of it is being manufactured out of thin air.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I see. Turning our eyes toward politics, apparently there was a suicide attack on Iranian soldiers, which just coincided with Crown Prince bin Salman's visit to Pakistan. And what it was a suicide attack on Revolutionary Guards in Iran's southeastern province of Sistan and Baluchistan, the second in 2 months. And it must have created some awkwardness for the Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan. And
well, what if it was a false flag? Because first of all, this was a car bomb.
Yes.
So nobody really got to see, what the driver looked like, or even if there was a driver. Mm-hmm. For all we know, the car could have just been parked and set off by remote control.
Yeah. Uh-huh. And it's apparently in a very troubled border province.
Yes.
In Pakistan, killed 27 and wounded 13. And occurred just days before Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman was scheduled to meet Pakistan as a part of his tour of Asian countries. And while Baluchistan is set to figure prominently in Prince Mohammed's talks with Mr. Khan, the attack was also coinciding with a U.S.-sponsored conference in Warsaw, widely seen as an effort by the Trump administration to further isolate Iran economically and diplomatically.
Well, I'm not sure exactly why there would be a linkage between this car bombing. Well, yeah, I can see where that might have been intended to send a message. And the message may be lost because, as we reported earlier in the show, mm-hmm. that Warsaw Conference turned out to be a debacle.
Oh.
They did not accomplish what they wanted to accomplish.
No, they didn't get
which
at
was
all.
to rah-rah and say, let's all agree we're going to pile up on Iran.
Yeah, and that thing about the statement of war that Netanyahu made.
Yes.
There's an English translation into the Hebrew for war, and it means exactly the same thing in the Hebrew language as it does in English.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. And this conference in Warsaw was dubbed the Ministerial to promote a future of peace and security in the Middle East. And Mike Pompeo kept insisting that U.S. policy was designed to force Iran to alter its regional and defense policies and not geared toward regime change in Tehran.
Well,
oh yeah, Mikey.
He may have said that in the beginning, but
Yeah.
toward the end of the conference, he was saying there will never be peace in the Middle East unless Iran is dealt with.
Yeah.
And again, there was another analysis that said basically this conference was set on up for Washington to reassert its hegemony over the Middle East because of the fallout from the U.S. withdrawal from the P5+1 treaty, which had resulted in the U.S. Being isolated. Because all these other countries that signed on to the P5+1, they want to continue with the deal.
Yeah.
And I think they justifiably resent the United States coming on in and saying, well, look, we've decided the deal is over and we need you to come on our side and make stink face at Iran. And these other countries basically were not enthusiastic about that. And I think there is a growing feeling around the world that the United States is throwing its weight around way too much, and that it's time to seek ways of reducing U.S. influence, hopefully non-militarily, primarily economically, so that the United States really gets the dose of humble they so desperately need.
Yes, I would say so. And apparently, right outside of the conference that we saw, Rudy Giuliani, the personal attorney for President Trump, was addressing a rally created by the Mujahideen al-Khalq. Now, this is a controversial Iranian exile group, which is believed to enjoy Saudi backing. And Mr. Giuliani told the protesters, who waved Iranian flags and giant yellow balloons emblazoned with the words regime change, that we want to see a regime change in Iran.
And obviously this controversial Saudi-backed Iranian group is going to be the basis of the new internationally approved government of Iran here.
Weren't they on the U.S.'s someone's foreign terrorist list?
I'm not sure. I don't think so. It's hard to tell. Anyway. So.
Next thing I'd like to talk about is 5G communications.
Okay.
And it is being described, again in Zero Hedge, actually no, Blacklisted News, the magic pixie dust of tech policy conversations. What is it about 5G, Mike, that is making people so excited, but also worried from a health standpoint?
Well, I think a lot of these concerns about, health is part of a propaganda campaign to get 5G kind of not be adopted in this country, because 5G technology was pioneered and is owned by Chinese companies, including Huawei.
Okay.
To whom, if 5G is adopted in this country, royalties would have to be paid. And so a lot of this hue and cry about 5G will make your nose drop off, I think is coming from the current holders of 4G and 3G technology, who basically can't compete with 5G and they don't want to. So they're trying to scare people away from 5G. That's where I think that's coming from. 5G is basically built around the same radio wavelengths and technology as 4G. It just has a higher bandwidth, and it's probably going to work really, really well. Another issue for the United States, however, is that our internet backbone in many places won't support the bandwidth for 5G. You may have 5G on your cell phone, but you'll get stuff delivered at 4G speeds. We went through that with the original 4G versus 4G LT. When we got 4G here in Hawaii, it was operating at 3G speeds because our local internet just couldn't keep up. We're way behind the rest of the world on internet technology, which is amazing because it was originally invented by the United States for the ARPANET. And like so many other things, they got a good start going and then they just dropped the ball. It's like when we went to the moon and never went back, although NASA now is saying they want to go back now. Now that, China's up there and embarrassing us and all these other countries are up at the moon. We got to get back there. It's our moon. It was 50 years ago that we did this.
And apparently, Sprint and T-Mobile have been talking to anyone out there who will listen that their competition eroding merger is the only way to ensure that America doesn't fall behind on 5G. And this is, in fact, despite the fact that both companies are on record clearly stating they both could have easily deployed 5G independently, And that same argument popped up again this week during merger hearings on Capitol Hill, as did the well-weathered claim that the merger is essential if America wants to beat China in the rush to 5G.
Well, I don't know why that would be a factor, because we here in America are not going to be using China's 5G, and people in China are not going to be using American 5G. All right, we're going to go ahead and take a phone call here from Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, guys.
Hello.
Mike, Ohotnik means the hunter. That stealth drone Russia has.
Yes. Yes.
And Mike, you're right with the 5G. That has to do with containing China technology-wise. That's why they're going around to Canada, and trying to get Germany on board and France. But China and Russia, and India, that's like half the world, right? So, how many? It doesn't matter if the U.S. don't have it at all. China's got a base of people no problem with 5G. But Mike, basically, with Rudy Giuliani, the State Department had that group on the terror watch list, and Rudy Giuliani lobbied and got it taken off.
That's where the confusion comes from.
Yeah.
That group was it MK something? That basically that's a terrorist group.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's like indirectly linked to Saudi. They're like Wahhabi, So if you want to know who probably put the bomb in the car on the side, it was probably them. Maybe they had information that Republican Guard were going past that area. This is the kind of tricks these people pull, Mike. Remember when they shot up the parade?
Yep.
Yes.
Iran. So Rudy Giuliani, he lobbied for them. So he's not like Mr. Clean.
No, he never has been. He still has questions to answer, like, who told him that Building 7 was going to collapse?
Yeah, absolutely.
Isn't it amazing, though? He's in that group. And you realize that he's in that clique.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
It's a shame. I don't know, Claire, what do you think, like, with Trump with the border wall and all? Like, what the whole him signing this thing? Do you think he, like, pulled the funny one on us? You know what I mean? Like, is there a part of you that thinks, like, we've been duped?
Well, I wish that his people had been more proactive in reading about all the places where he couldn't build these national monuments, sanctuaries, etc., because the bill is full of more holes than Swiss cheese. And California today has come out with a legal action. Governor Newsom has come out with a lawsuit preventing the federal government from doing that.
Okay, well, we've got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the phone call, Dustin, and we will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're going to go back to the phones to Sean in North Carolina. Aloha, Sean. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Wanted to talk a little bit about all the people calling about the wall. I think at this point, the wall is kind of irrelevant. If he built a wall a month ago, we're still we're in the kind of trouble that the only thing, in my view, that's going to save this country is a hot civil war, and I'll tell you why. We have a problem with legal migration here in this country. So if he built the wall a month ago, yes, it's going to keep the illegals out, but we have a problem with legal migration here. Let me tell you why. Left has painted a picture to all the legal migrants here that the white wealthy is the devil in this country. And at this point, they have so many children that's about to turn 18 with the indoctrination in them that the only way that they can get to the level of the single white male and everything they have is to vote somebody that is for them. And the left is all about the migrants. Doesn't matter if they're legal or illegal. And we're going to get to a point when those children severely outnumber us that we'll never win another election as it is, even with a wall keeping the illegals out. it's already too late here. One of the two has
it's
to
a
be
real.
removed.
I agree, it's a problem, and the Democrats, they're so far along with this plan, they're not even hiding it anymore. There are Democrats out there saying that we rely on these illegal immigrant voters, and hey, don't you understand? They're not supposed to vote. And at which point they scream, "Oh, you're being a racist. They have a right to come here and they have a right to vote." No, they don't. Read the rules. And like I said, we're dealing with people who don't really know what the laws are.
Yeah.
Our Senator Mazie Hirono had to be told during a congressional hearing that there's actually a law against stepping across the border from Mexico into the United States of America. And you talk about clueless, but it's all this politics and ideology, and our government is really factionalizing to the point where it could easily crumble in the very, very near future. Mm-hmm. And again, while I'm glad the wall is getting built as a temporary stopgap, the real way to stop the illegal immigrant problem is to just start enforcing Title VIII. And that's the elephant in the room. Why aren't people enforcing Title VIII? Because the laws are already on the books. If they cross the border, kick them back on over. If somebody on this side of the border helps them out, put that somebody in jail. If employers who give illegal jobs, they need to go to jail. People who are providing sanctuary, housing, transportation, any kind of aid to undocumented immigrants, they're guilty of Title VIII violations. These mayors of sanctuary cities, these governors of sanctuary states are guilty of all these Title VIII violations with 1 count per illegal immigrant. So if Title VIII were to be enforced, these mayors and governors are going away for the rest of their lives. They're going to be going away for longer than El Chapo is.
Yeah, to me, it's come to the point where, they're making it clear that, they want a complete takeover. They want to get rid of all the Americans that they possibly can to be taken over by migrants. I mean, they're passing laws that if you're an American citizen, you can go get a legal abortion, but they're all about saving these poor, innocent migrant children. Doesn't matter if they're with MS-13 or whatnot. If you're an American citizen,
they're trying to do, and they're doing this in Europe.
Here's the irony. Listen to this. If a policeman, if a woman is on her way to have an abortion and somebody recklessly hits her, and when the cops show up, they're going to be charged with double murder.
Not in New
York. But if
York.
she makes it safely to that abortion clinic, that's completely fine.
Not in New York. They had a case.
What kind of country we live in?
Okay, Sean, there was this case in New York where this guy murdered his pregnant girlfriend, and because of New York's new abortion law, he was not charged in the death of the baby. That's how crazy it is. What's going on is the globalists want to go into every part of the world, get rid of the, shall we say, indigenous, hereditary, multi-generational population, and replace them with immigrants as part of this effort to basically take the human race, put them into a blender, hit puree, and pour out this blended race of workers for the future. And that's really what's behind all of this. And that's the reason for all of this anti-white agenda here in the United States of America. And we're seeing in Europe, and even the French yellow vests are saying it appears to be that the European Union wants to get rid of the French and the Italian and the German people and replace them with people from Africa and people from the Middle East. Anyway, Sean, we got to let you go. Thank you for the phone call.
Thanks, Mike.
We're going to close the phone lines again, and we'll be back after these commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And Claire, you've got a story up on your talking points I think is very important, and it actually gets back to something I mentioned earlier in the program.
Okay. Apparently, we are looking at Saudi Arabia and the upcoming secret nuclear war.
Well, I got a news flash for you. It's very difficult to keep a nuclear war secret because of all the noise it makes.
Yes, okay. And apparently Israel has been issuing some very dire threats against both Syria and Iran of thermonuclear devastation if either nation retaliates against Israeli bombings. Could you turn that? Thank you.
Okay.
The world is moving closer to the brink, folks, and there are a lot of factors coming up, including Israel's internal political collapse. And the writer of this article, and I think this is also from Zero Hedge, we're pushing toward more instability, and with America also pushing toward more political instability. It's making things even worse. Now, Mike, has an actual indictment come against Netanyahu yet?
We have not heard anything. It was supposed to happen this week, and so far we're not hearing anything. But again, early in the program, we were reporting on how, because Netanyahu is running out of Iranian targets in Syria, he is now saying, we're going to go after Iran in other countries, starting with Iraq.
Oh, boy.
And no matter what you call it, he's bombing other people's countries.
Yeah.
And they can't bomb him back because Israel has these nuclear weapons that he could fry them with.
Yeah.
And so, Netanyahu gets to act real butch. He can be manly and warrior-like and, send other people's kids and American weapons to blow things up in these other countries, and they don't dare fight back. And it is an ugly, ugly situation.
And apparently no one can reason with him, because I know that Russia's Putin has tried.
Yep.
But that's not happening. And
well, Netanyahu is politically cornered because, if he is facing that indictment, he is behind in the polls with Benny Gantz. And Benny Gantz is not much better than Netanyahu. In fact, I would say Benny Gantz is probably slightly to the right of Attila the Hun.
Oh, ouch! Not good.
And is out there already campaigning on the settlements are important for Israel's spirituality and security. So Gantz is also on board with this idea of eventually annexing Gaza and the West Bank and saying this is now all Israel. All you Palestinians get out.
Absolutely. And apparently there is a lot of nuclear proliferation going on.
Yes.
And new ones are clean.
Let's back up a bit here because you missed an important part.
Okay.
They're talking about how most nations have secret organizations that investigate nuclear proliferation but monitor the use of nuclear explosives. Now, we used to have one in this country. It's probably been replaced by now. But do you remember when Valerie Plame was outed?
Yes.
As a CIA asset.
Yes.
And, the company where she was working, Brewster Jennings and Associates, turned out to be the CIA's facility for tracking third world nuclear weapons. And it just got utterly destroyed by this outing of Valerie Plame. And the point that this article we're looking at here is making is the earlier designed nuclear weapons were very dirty. They were inefficient. They only burned a tiny bit of their cores, leaving the rest as fallout. That's a good example would be Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And even after the devastation of those bombs, after that was all the radiation that had to be cleaned up. Now, supposedly, newer nuclear warheads are designed to burn up their cores entirely and leaving no radiation or little radiation at all. And unfortunately, they're cheap to build, simple in design, and any nation that wants nuclear weapons can have them. All you need is that fissionable material, and it's starting to appear that may not be as tightly controlled by the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty as people talked about. If you remember back when the former government of South Africa fell, documents surfaced showing that Israel was in the process of selling a nuclear weapon to South Africa. And it's thought that Israel and South Africa jointly tested a nuclear weapon called the Vela incident. So it's in all probability there are nuclear weapons out there that nobody knows about.
And this starts to focus, though, about Saudi Arabia. Now, this has a larger military budget than Russia, but Russia spends much of their budget on a huge standing army, navy, dozens of nuclear submarines, and a massive thermonuclear missile capability, which is supported by an equally huge stockpile of nuclear weapons. Now, Saudi Arabia spends more than Russia, but it's got a small navy, small standing army, mostly foreign mercenaries or mercs, if you will, hired from allies. And apparently their budget makes no sense unless you scrutinize it very carefully. Now, Saudi Arabia spends about 40% of its military budget on nuclear weapons and delivery systems. And this is why they're caught so often lying when claims are made about how many weapons they buy each year from Britain and the US. And the real delivered numbers are minuscule, and Saudi depends on American bombs, American refueling, and even Israeli planes in their war on Yemen.
Well, now that's interesting that that's surfacing now, because one of the stories we had, I think it was just yesterday, is that there is a measure being introduced into Congress to find a way to prevent Saudi Arabia from obtaining nuclear weapons. I'm sure that this is coming directly from Israel, but if this is accurate, it may well be that Saudi Arabia already has them, that they learned a lesson from Israel, developed them in secret, and then don't tell anybody really that you have them.
Yeah. And there was an article from CNN, the Clinton News Network, October 13th of last year, and the figures from Britain are skewed even more. Now, President Trump made the observation that he didn't want a $110 billion arms deal he brokered with Saudi Arabia to unravel over allegations that the Gulf Kingdom had murdered a journalist at its consulate in Turkey.
Yeah, we got lots of journalists.
Yeah, but his comments are missing the mark on a key fact. Saudi Arabia has so far only followed through on a $14.5 billion in actual purchases. Now, what is spoken of today is kind of straying a lot from the truth, and it's a disinformation campaign that tries to erase history. From Strategic Culture, a site the FBI says is financed by a foreign spy agency, we read the following. The Israeli government has begun selling the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia information on how to develop nuclear weapons, according to a senior official at the Israeli military organization, IHLS, Israel's Homeland Security. Amit Doron, who is a senior nuclear commentator at the organization, partially funded by the U.S. weapons giant Raytheon, not a surprise there, came forward because of his concerns over the emerging nuclear arms race in the region. And the cooperation between Israel and the U.S. in helping the Saudis develop a nuclear program is just the latest sign of their warming relationship, with Israel recently calling the Saudi crown prince a partner of Israel. And you know, it's interesting. The two BFFs of President Trump in the Middle East, the butcher of Gaza and the butcher of Yemen. I don't know what's tied up in that, Mike, but something.
Well, this next paragraph is the really significant part.
Though packaged as a revelation, in fact, the information seems to damn both Israel and Saudi Arabia. In fact, it covers about 40 years of cooperation in nuclear weapons research and production.
Well, that basically tells us, Saudi Arabia does have nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
And the part that annoys me about this, and I mentioned it before, is we're always hearing that poor little Israel is being threatened by all those other nasty Middle Eastern countries, and that's why the United States has to send so much money and so many weapons to Israel to defend itself. And here we find out that all those Middle Eastern nations, except for Iran, are all buddy-buddy and have been for decades.
Yeah.
But if Israel and Saudi Arabia have been working on nuclear weapons for 40 years, Saudi Arabia has them. It doesn't take that long to do it. It didn't even take the Manhattan Project that long to build a nuclear weapon, and they were going completely from scratch.
Yeah. And apparently, Saudi Arabia's next foray into nuclear partnership touches on Pakistan. Since '79, Pakistan has deployed troops in Saudi Arabia, ostensibly to defend that nation. Remember, a nation with a military budget larger than Russia's from Iran. And India now is going to isolate Pakistan after suicide bomb attack on a police convoy that killed 44 Indian police. And I don't know quite how India thinks it's going to do that, but they've threatened to completely isolate Pakistan on a global scale following the suicide car bomb, which killed 44 paramilitary police officers in the disputed Kashmir region. Well, to the Indian Prime Minister, I have one word: referendum. Give the people of Kashmir an opportunity to choose. And I mean, that's been teased on them, Mike, ever since World War II. But what the Kashmiri people need that's going to diffuse this anger and this violence is a choice between becoming independent, if India would let it.
You're assuming that this suicide car bomb was a grassroots event, and to
may have not
me,
been.
this feels like it's a false flag provocation.
It could have been, yeah.
To basically allow India to go on an aggression against Pakistan.
Yep. And apparently the car was packed with 350 kilograms of explosive. Is that a lot?
That is a lot. That's one heck of a big bang.
Excuse me. And overtook the 78 vehicle convoy and rammed into a bus about 12 miles from the regional capital, Srinagar, yesterday. And, you know, it was a pretty terrible act.
Yeah.
So you think that this was
they
a
heard the
false...
explosion 12 kilometers away. That was a big, big bomb. And again, that's another reason to suspect state sponsorship to get that much explosive.
Yeah. The Pakistani-based Islamic militant group Jaish-e-Mohammed claims responsibility. And theoretically, so the Indian government is saying, we demand that Pakistan stop supporting terrorists and terrorist groups operating from their territory and dismantling the infrastructure operated by terrorist outfits to launch attacks in other countries. Now, that was in an Indian Foreign Ministry statement. And, I mean, Mike, it was a pretty lousy, horrible attack. But you see state-sponsored strings.
Yeah, I would say. And again, I question whether Pakistan really had anything to do with this because it doesn't really gain them anything.
No.
And it provokes India and justifies India escalating tensions along that Kashmir region. So it feels like a false flag to me.
Okay. All righty. You've already covered this,
Yeah,
right?
we already talked about, we talked
about
the summit in Poland.
Yeah.
And Netanyahu was out there, and he was really all over the top. And a lot of people are saying that, in effect, he was using that Warsaw Conference as a campaign platform. And that's the reason he was speaking in Hebrew and texting in Hebrew, because his target audience was back home in Israel.
Right.
But it may not really help him. And again, part of it is because, with the exception of Netanyahu himself, world leaders did not show up.
Yeah, Trump, they sent their lackeys.
Yeah, the lackeys were there. So here's Netanyahu, with the flunkies, trying to say, we're going to go after Iran. But in the end, the whole summit basically was a debacle.
Yeah.
It was Washington's attempt to reassert itself as the center political influence in the region. That failed.
Yep.
Pompeo was there to build support among the Middle Eastern nations to go after Iran. That failed.
Yep.
He was there to try and get the rest of the P5+1 nations to pull out of the deal and allow sanctions. That failed.
Right.
So 3 strikes and you're out.
Yeah, something like that. And we need to remember that in 2002, Netanyahu told Congress, if you take out Saddam, I guarantee you that it will have an enormous positive reverberations on the region.
Wrong.
Oh, ow. I mean, come on, BB. It's ridiculous. And history has shown us what a horrendous thing this was.
Yes.
And it was all about the oil, controlling it, controlling the company that was going to explore Iran's other oil fields, and that the oil was only going to be sold in dollars. Is that still the case with Iraqi oil?
Yeah, very much so. Iraq's oil is still being trafficked in the U.S. dollar. Same thing with Libya. And that's another reason why we're going into Venezuela, is Venezuela has a habit of selling their oil for other currencies.
Yeah.
And the U.S. is trying to reassert the petrodollar to keep the world basically under the hegemonic domination of the U.S. dollar.
Right.
And try and reverse this trend of de-dollarization that we're seeing in all these other countries. Where it's going to come to a head is going to be, the world is going to be split basically in 2. Those nations that are still under the control of the U.S. dollar versus those nations that are going to break away with their own independent system. And if the U.S. can survive parasitizing on those nations that are still under the dollar, maybe things will calm down a little bit. But if those nations continue to split away to the non-dollar side, at some point it will result in a war.
Wow. That's a pretty awful thing to have to contemplate.
It's kind of a really silly idea to incinerate the surface of planet Earth in an argument over whose brand of ink and paper we're all supposed to use for the next 100 years.
Yeah, not good for we the people. I'd like to go over to the issue of intelligence and being able to evaluate data. There's a company that claims it has prevented 16 school shootings. Now,
using AI.
Yeah, using AI. And last year, you'll remember, on Valentine's Day, a gunman killed 17 people at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. It was apparently the deadliest high school shooting, if one wants to believe that, in U.S. history. And various tech companies have really ramped up the efforts to use AI to prevent similar tragedies. And they claim that the system is flagging many violent events before they happen. Sort of predictive pre-crime, right?
Well, it certainly didn't work in today's Aurora shooting.
No, heck no.
No, it didn't. Although that isn't a school.
Yeah.
But, we have to take a commercial break here.
Okay.
So this is our last commercial break. Back soon with the last segment of our show. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Last segment of our program on this Pau Hana Friday. And a couple of stories to sort of, basically end the show, but kind of illustrate just how weird our country has become. Do you know that America spends more on its prison system than it does on public schools? And California is the worst of them. California spends $8.6 billion a year on its prison system, more than any other state, averaging $64,000 per inmate per year. It's also the state with the biggest gap between education and prison spending, spending just $11,000 per student for a difference of roughly $50,000.
Good Lord, that's awful, Mike.
That is, I'm sorry, but the schools are where the money should be going. And understand that a lot of those prisoners in those prisons are there for like minor drug offenses, like smoking a marijuana joint or something. But prisons have become big business now, and huge profits are being made off of them.
Especially the private prisons.
Absolutely. Well, California has a lot of those private prisons. That's where the money is going. California pays the private prisons, and the prisons maximize their profits by setting up prison factories or prison call centers. And the prisoners will work. They'll be paid a little bit, nowhere near minimum wage, but enough to get cigarettes from the prison commissary and stuff like that.
That bites.
And that, of course, is competition that outside businesses, they can't compete. Now, over in Times Square, in response to this horrible New York abortion law, Focus on the Family has launched See Life Clearly, which is the largest pro-life effort in the history of the organization. And it features live 4D ultrasounds that will be broadcast across the largest monitors in Times Square.
Good.
Yes, absolutely.
Good. Yeah.
And that law is horrible. That idea that this man who shot his pregnant girlfriend won't be charged for the death of the baby because of the abortion law.
Yeah. Oh, man.
Over in Mississippi, they're going another direction. They passed a bill to ban abortion once a baby's heartbeat is detected. I think that is a very good line to draw.
Yeah.
I think that's a very good. They're calling them the heartbeat bills.
Yeah.
Okay. This one I'm absolutely opposed against, rather. This is at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C., and the Student Senate has authorized a campus-wide referendum to vote on whether today's Georgetown students could be forced to pay reparations fees for slaves the university sold nearly 200 years ago to pay off the school's debts.
Huh? You're not making that up.
I'm not making that up.
Whoa.
I'm not making that up. This idea that today's college students who have never been either slaves or slaveholders are going to be forced to pay reparations to the descendants of these slaves back then.
But which descendants? I mean, how is that going to be chosen?
Oh, I imagine there's some genealogy involved in there and some paperwork. All right, there's the music. It's time for us to get out of here and get some stuff done with the rest of our Pauhana Friday. Please stay tuned for John Stadmiller. I'm sure he's got lots of interesting things to share with you. Please take what you learn here, share it with everybody that you know. And please donate to Republic Broadcasting. No donation is too small.
Amen.
Amen. Have a good, safe weekend.
Yes.
Have a good. We'll be back here on President's Day. It's on Monday. And aloha, America.